trends now. Well, the British bank Barclays has said first quarter profits fell by a quarter compared to the same period last year. Losses at its European business and a hefty bill for reorganising its operations were behind the steep loss. Pre-tax profit for the 3 months ended March came in at £1.79 billion. Well, that's just $2.75 billion, which is a 25% drop on the previous year. But the investment bank is going well. Profits there up 11%. Credit Suisse, the Swiss bank, said that profits jumped almost $1.4 billion in the past 3 months, so that's doing well. A sharp rebound, by the way, from the same period a year ago, but then, of course, it was hit by a large charge related to debts. Now, like Barclays, Credit Suisse says that its investment banking business is performing well. The bank also said that cost-cutting efforts have started to pay off. The size of the workforce has been cut by 4% since the first quarter of last year. Meanwhile, two former bosses of Kaupthing, which was once Iceland's biggest bank, have been charged with fraud and manipulating the bank's share price. Kaupthing collapsed in 2008, along with another large bank, Landsbanki. Now, former chief executive Haidar Már Sigurdsson and the former chairman Sigurður Einarsson both plead not guilty to the charges. So that's an update on the banking industry. And what about the deeper issue there of trends? The financial crisis that hit 5 years ago has raised a lot of questions about the role of the banking industry. There's still a lot of anger that taxpayers had to bail out some of the biggest players, and it was a shock to many people that chief executives of some banks had little idea about the risks hidden within their empires, or in fact, what went on within the walls. Janet Ecker is the president of the Toronto Financial Services Alliance and used to work closely with the future governor of the Bank of England, by the way, Mark Carney. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about the banking industry as a whole. You're in Canada, of course, and that's your focus. Nonetheless, is your sense now that banks, after being mired in crisis and scandal for a very, very long time, are now starting to emerge, that the confidence is returning?
Well, hopefully it will, because the banking industry, despite the troubles that they've gone through in Europe and the United States, is a very important support to your economy. And you can see what happens when your financial system blows up, if you will, if I can put it that way. So hopefully they will get the problems behind them. You're starting to see, as they said today, some profits and get back on a more stable keel.
Yeah, but here's the point. They're coming from the investment banking business, aren't they? And, you know, markets have performed pretty well since the start of the year. You know, Wall Street up 10% and so on. Europe's not doing badly either. That's a little bit what's driving investment banking profits there. It's not the lending side, is it?
No, there's a lot. I mean, listen, the economies are still facing major headwinds, a lot of challenges, and even in Canada that has come through the crisis, as they like to joke, we had a good crisis, came through very well. But, you know, we're seeing a softening of the economy. Our banks are well capitalized, they're very sound, and it's been the 5th year in a row that the World Economic Forum has said that Canada's banks are the safest and soundest in the world. So, I mean, that's certainly been an asset for our economy, but nobody's taking anything for granted, because when you look at the world economy, you look at sovereign debt, you look at some of the political instability in some countries around the world, there's a lot of risks out there.
Yeah, well, Mark Carney, of course, has been heading up the Canadian Central Bank and has received a great deal of credit for steering the country through the crisis very well indeed. He's coming over to the Bank of England and hopefully he can do the same thing there. There is a big disparity between how North America, in terms of central banking, is handling this particular moment and Europe, isn't there?
Well, Canada doesn't have the challenges. We went into the crisis, for example, with a balanced budget, actually having paid down debt, because we went through a fairly serious debt crisis in the 90s. So we were in a little stronger position. So I think the Bank of Canada, while people are expressing concern about how long, low for long, as they call it, our interest rates have been very low for a long period of time, as they have been in the United States and other places. That's had an impact on consumer spending. So Mark Carney has been very vocal to say to Canadians, watch that household debt. Yep. So it's a little bit of a different situation than what you're seeing in Europe in terms of what the central bankers are trying to deal with.
But the US Central Bank has been blamed quite a bit over this quantitative easing that it's been doing, and at low interest rates, for creating various asset bubbles. I've seen it linked to Italian debt and all manner of things. Do you think that there are some should we say, untold, unfelt consequences of this very low interest rate environment that we're seeing and this quantitative easing?
Well, there's always going to be an unintended consequence. I mean, if there's one thing that we've learned about financial services in the history of financial services, is there's always an unintended consequence. I think the good news is that Bernanke and the other leadership in the United States, I mean, they know they're in uncharted territory, if I can put it that way. And so, you know, they're watching things very carefully in terms of, are they going to be able to turn off the taps, if you will, fast enough and at the right time? And there's no question that is certainly a risk. But at the same time, they've been confronted with an unprecedented situation too. And the good news is that in 2008, the global system did not collapse. The challenge now, I think, for a lot of central bankers, regulators around the world is, can we get back to some sort of concerted joint action in the regulatory field, in the economic field, because finances it's global. It is a global system, and it works well when it's a global system. And so I think the responses to the problems need to happen on a global basis. So I think, and hopefully Mr. Carney and Mark's experience in Canada, and with the, I'll call it elevated position here in England and in the UK, we'll have an opportunity to have an influence on the global debate.
Janet, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.